Ken Kors here for Torus Link and founder, multi-instrumentalist, songwriter, and vocalist of The Silence Noise. You can find me at thesilencenoise.com, The Silence Noise on all major music services, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon, as well as Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, /The Silence Noise. So excited to do this today for Torus Link. Well, the interesting part about my creative process is that it primarily started for me. I wasn't writing music for anyone else. I was a big fan of other people's music. I started off as someone that just listened and recorded tapes in my bedroom as a kid and started making my own mixes, and that became becoming a DJ as I got a little bit older and started becoming a teenager. And for the most part, my art was for me. It was a way of expressing feelings that I felt that I couldn't share with anybody else, or ideas that I felt might be too far out there, or things that were just private to me. So I didn't really start with the intention of sharing music or art with others. And as I've gotten older, that's changed quite a bit, because what I've discovered is a lot of the things that I might have felt ashamed of, or a lot of the things that I might have felt strange about, or relationships that I had, or all sorts of situations, were things that were somewhat universal. I think everyone has experienced some of the things that I discuss in my music, to some of the same extremes that I have. So once I started to realize that and kind of become comfortable in my own skin, it really became about sharing music as well as sharing the process of making music with others, because I took a 10-year hiatus. I stopped writing music. I was in a project where one of the partners in that project passed away, and life got busy, and so I just decided, oh well, this is something that I don't really need. So I stopped writing music back in 2007 and 2008, and I took a long break. And the music world has completely changed since that time. It went from mostly being hardware based. I was writing most of my songs on physical workstations or keyboards, to mostly being software based. And it's not to say that didn't exist back then. It certainly did. But now what you can do with music is amazing. It's incredible what you can do even as a bedroom musician. And for me, the other thing that I realized is I wanted to be taught how to do this a certain way, and I found thousands of hours of amazing tutorials and training and teaching and things like that. But it was just helpful for me to see the whole process from beginning to end. The most helpful sessions that I was ever part of was watching the process from the idea of a song, or just humming into my phone, or whatever it was, all the way out into being a full-fledged production. So I want to share the music, obviously, but I also like to share the process of making music. As I mentioned, this is something that I've recently started doing live on Twitch, and it's challenging because for me, the process of songwriting is pretty personal, it's pretty vulnerable. There's a lot of topics I'll be dealing with at times that are emotional. I'm also a person that's very self-critical, so part of the process for me, I often joke about this on stream, is getting mad at myself, or cussing, or whatever it is that I need to do to get out what I'm feeling in the moment. I'll go through phases in songwriting where I love the idea, I think it's the most brilliant thing, then I start working on an aspect of it, or I start getting micro, and then I hate the idea. So I have love-hate relationships with a lot of my creations, in the sense that I go through this process as I'm creating an idea. And sometimes it's smooth sailing, sometimes the ideas come easy, but most of the time they don't. And this is the thing that I realize is challenging for a lot of artists and a lot of people in general, is not backing off when things get challenging, especially when it comes to art. There's a lot of people who are inspiration chasers, and they'll go, all right, well, when I'm in the mood, or when I feel the idea comes, or when whatever, when the perfect scenario shows up. And that was me for 10 years. It was like, all right, well, I never stopped loving music, and I never stopped listening to music, but I was doing that same thing, waiting for some sort of mystery inspiration to come along, or some sort of thing to happen that wasn't ever going to happen. It wasn't until I started getting committed to the idea and the process of saying, all right, well, I love writing music. I want to write music again. I have things that I want to say in this creative medium. So why did I stop? And the answer was, there really was no good reason. So for me, the creative process generally starts with kind of overcoming. So step one, I guess I would say, is it starts with overcoming my kind of self-defeating or self-esteem issues. That's really the easiest way to say it. All right, I have this idea. It's not a stupid idea. It's something that has legs. It's something that could go somewhere, something like that. So for me, generally, it starts with one, just kind of setting the stage for myself, going, all right, regardless of how good, bad, and different this idea is, regardless of whether I have any inspiration at all, or even if I have an idea or not. Part one is just mentally going, all right, I'm going to engage in the creative process. Then step two, generally for me in the songwriting process, is capture inspiration when it does strike, or capture ideas when it does strike. I'm a person that's walking around with melodies and ideas in my head all the time. Sometimes it's other people's melodies and other people's songs, but most of the time I don't know where it comes from. It's something unique to me. So one of the great things I was taught about music by one of the bands that I absolutely adore, the Family Crest, it's actually how I became connected with Torus Link, was capture those ideas wherever you are. We're all very fortunate enough to have cell phones. They have voice recorder or even music apps on them. So I capture a lot of those sketch ideas. And so normally it starts there. It starts with some ideas of lyrics that maybe I jotted down in my notes app, or it starts with me humming something into my phone. And then I bring it back, and generally that begins the kind of process of developing the arrangement or the instrumentation. So normally for me that starts on the bass guitar. I'll figure out what it was that I was trying to convey on the guitar or the bass guitar. Sometimes the keys, but generally bass, because I want that foundation of the song. So that's where it's starting for me. Kind of figure out the notes I was humming or the notes I was playing. Sometimes I'll find that, I start changing the idea right then to something that's more natural or more interesting to play. But sometimes I'll just figure out the idea in and of itself, and generally, especially since I've been doing this a long time, even with that 10-year break, those ideas come pretty quickly once I go there. So normally, then from there, it can vary, but in general, I would say the process. So step one, remember, get my mind right. Step two, make sure I'm capturing all of my ideas whenever I'm coming up with them. Step three, from that point, bring the sketch and start working out the instrumentation. And then step four is really start the arrangement, start the songwriting process. And then step five is obviously going through the process of mixing, production, any final creative ideas, getting the song ready for other people to listen to. So taking it from that rough sketch or rough idea to having a finished arrangement, to having a mix or production that I'm happy with. And then the last step, which a lot of people forget, is then you have to release and promote it. So the last step for me is once it's ready, sometimes I'll be pretty organized about it, and I'll put the date on the calendar, and I'll start developing promotional materials, videos, images, whatever. These days I've been using Twitch a lot for that. So people are aware I'm developing a song on stream, and then I'm building it up for release. But yeah, then you have to release that art to the world. And generally you want to tell people about it when you do it. So it doesn't mean you have to have like huge fanfare or anything around it, or be doing any kind of crazy release schedule. But you at least want to make people aware, even if that means sending out a text message or Facebook message or whatever it is, to just say, hey, I got something new. Why don't you go check it out? So that would be the creative process for me. And again, I stream a lot of that on live stream these days. Well, the interesting thing for me is I'm not always happy while I'm doing it. In fact, the nature of expression and creativity in music for me is a lot of times I'm exploring pretty dark concepts in myself, in my emotions, in my past, mistakes, pain, grief, anger, rage. I find my creative energy tends to go towards there. I'm not a person that's really good at writing happy-ish songs. Doesn't mean I can't write a happy song, and doesn't mean that I haven't written happy songs. But for me, the creative process isn't always necessarily a happy process. Now, what I would say is it's a satisfying process. So even if during the moment or at that time I dislike what I'm doing, or I'm feeling like the idea is not clicking or things aren't working, for me, taking it from that idea of hearing, and a lot of times I'll do this process on stream. I will listen to the hummed version of it, or the couple of miscellaneous lyrics that I had or whatever. I'll listen to that version of it compared to the final version, and it's just an extremely satisfying and great and awe-inspiring process to hear, like, oh, I went from this nothing idea or this sketch or this humming or something into this final process. And then not only that, if I go back and I listen to some of the first art that I created back in the 90s, I started writing songs when I was a teenager in high school in the 90s. If I listen to the evolution of my songwriting process and my lyric writing process from say 96 or 97 to today, there's an improvement process, or there's a huge curve that happens, and there's multiple places in that process where I take huge steps forward. So it's a very satisfying part of the game to hear that progress for myself. And I'm a big believer that you have to be in it to do that for yourself. You have to enjoy that process of improvement. You don't necessarily always have to love every piece you do or every song you do or everything that happens. Like it's not about that. It's not about trying to create the perfect thing every time. But what is important is that you can see the process of growth. You're doing it for satisfying reasons that are true to you. You know what you're after. So for you, this may not always necessarily be about expressing positive emotions. I think most great art comes from some of the deepest, darkest, and most negative emotions that I and other people have. So for me, as part of that process, it's really important to keep in mind that it's not always about being happy while doing it, but for me, I find satisfaction in that process of expressing those things, of seeing the growth, of seeing the progress from the beginning to the end, both in the micro level of a song at a time and hearing that process, as well as the macro level where I'm hearing that progress over years and over time of getting that done. Well, for me, I was a person that was always inspired. Influences, I could have a whole video where I'm talking about that. It's probably something that I do on stream. I actually have a massive Spotify playlist that I put together of influences for specific songs or specific ideas. So for me, I'm extremely passionate about music. I'm actually a big believer that music is something that saved my life, that helped me understand lessons about love, about connection, as well as about not feeling alone in some of the darkest feelings that I had. I'm a person that gravitates towards art that tends to be on the dark side. For me, that obsession kind of started with groups and bands like Depeche Mode. So Depeche Mode was really the first one for me that's in the kind of darker realm of music. Then I moved into the goth industrial scene. So Depeche was kind of a great transition into that scene. And for me, in the late 90s, there happened to be a great boom in various areas of the goth industrial scene. Probably the last great boom for that scene. It's still around to some degree, but it's not the same as it was then, when you had a variety of different genres that fit into that kind of goth industrial scene. You had Nine Inch Nails blowing up and being huge at the time. You had Marilyn Manson blowing up and being huge and even mainstream at the time. But then you had this whole culture of EBM music that was coming up. Bands like V&V Nation and the Cruise Shadows and Combi Christ, Icon of Coil back then. So many different synth-based bands. And then obviously you had all the 80s inspired influences that went with that, like Susie and the Banshees and Sisters of Mercy and bands like that. So for me, it's all about going into that place of expressing things that oftentimes make me uncomfortable. And the first piece of art that I created was actually a retelling of my life story had things gone a far more negative route. Not to say that my life is perfect or anything, but for me it was a thought exercise and a creative exercise of saying, well, what if I went a different way and I became a very dark and violent and rage-filled person, and that dominated my whole life and all my relationships. And so for me, what I'm trying to do and what I'm trying to connect with in my music is that experience of, understanding what the multifacets of the human experience, understanding those emotions. I tend to gravitate towards those deeper thoughts, which oftentimes are reflections on anger and rage and frustration and failure and depression. For me, that's what's inspirational for me. It tends to be where both my songwriting and my lyric writing goes. And I don't do that because I'm encouraging people to do those things. Or I'm saying, my hope would be that people go out and, because I sometimes write music that has violent concepts in it, that I would hope that people would go out and be violent. I do it to express it in different ways, to show that there's a healthy way of expressing those things, that it is universal to have those kinds of thoughts. It is universal to have the experience of failed relationships and failed friendships and difficult lives, difficult childhoods, being bullied, being pushed around, life not being fair. All of those things are why I do what I do, because for me, expressing those in a healthy way is critical, and being able to show the world that, hey, you're not alone in this. This is something that you and all of us really feel at some point in our lives and in time is really a critical thing. So that's why I do what I do. No is the answer. In fact, it's not even easy to just finish one song, let alone finish albums of songs or do song a week or be writing for years. In fact, you have to find new ways over and over and over to become reconnected to what you do, because you're going to evolve. Your tastes are going to evolve, what you care about, what you think about, what you're listening to, what's inspiring you, what your muses are, your relationships. Life it changes. Life changes, even the stuff I was writing a year ago to now, it's like a time capsule of that experience. So, no, it is not an easy process. There is some discipline required to keep yourself going and to keep yourself doing the right thing or expressing yourself creatively. And what's worse is the reality is it's kind of a hard lesson that a lot of us learn is that for the most part, you're always going to be the person that cares the most about your art, whether you draw, whether it's music, whatever it is. And no one is really obligated to support you in those things. Nobody's really obligated to like what you do or listen to what you do. You might toil forever, and I'm not somebody that I feel like I have a big following either. I do what I do for me, and if people resonate with it and gravitate towards it, great. And if they don't, they don't. There are some artists that do these things as a commodity and they do it as a career, and that's one direction of going. But for me, I'm certainly not at that point yet, and I'm someone that I believe that no, any process of vulnerability, whether it's art, music, writing, creation, pottery, I don't care what it is, there are vulnerable pieces of yourself that are going into it. Whether it's positive or negative, vulnerable pieces of yourself are exposed to the world. And it's not always a comfortable thing. And those reactions aren't always comfortable. And what people give back to you is not always comfortable. And so, no, it is definitely not an easy process. It's not easy to be disciplined. It's not easy to be consistent. It's not easy to make the right decisions for yourself. And you won't a lot of the time. A lot of the time, you'll commit to yourself that you're going to do something and you're not going to do it. So, no, I would say it's not an easy process. And you're fooling yourself if you think, oh, I'm in an inspired period right now, or I just picked this hobby up. And then a year from now or 2 years from now, when life gets busy or things happen, or, I'm going through a dark period, like I just lost my father, you go, oh, well, there's plenty of reasons for you to not do it. So I would say absolutely not. It's not an easy process. But as I said earlier, it's a satisfying process. So you have to ask yourself, do you want to be satisfied? Does it satisfy you enough to see that progress and that process happen or not? And because no, it's not easy. So for me, the biggest challenges, as I said in my response to another question, is the vulnerability. Art is about vulnerability. It's about opening yourself up really wide and showing off things about yourself that you might be scared of, or that people may have made fun of you for, or people bullied you for, or things you've been, judgments that people have about you, things that you lie about to other people. I've covered all of those concepts in my songwriting, and no, it's not easy, and it's especially not easy if someone like recognizes that. I don't ever write directly about people or situations, so it's not like this is a song about my friend who did this and this. I never do that personally. It's just my creative preference. But really, it's about opening yourself up, and you will be judged. You will be trolled. People will act harshly. I think a lot of people have thin skin these days for that, which in art, it's where you have the thinnest skin, because you're really opening yourself up. Look at me. Look at this side of me that's so delicate or so angry. Like both of those things could come across. Like people might look at some of my music and go, wow, what an angry and rage-filled person, which I'm not. I embody the whole human experience like everybody else does. But the truth is, you're going to face adversity as you do in anything in life. And you're going to take this type of adversity far, far more personally than you will take any other type of adversity, because generally you're doing art, I know I am, because there's just something inside you that feels compelled to open up and share that experience with the world or put it into some sort of tangible thing that you can revisit and then other people can revisit. I do believe art is communal, so eventually that art is going to be shared with other people, and once it's out in the world, they're going to have whatever reactions they're going to have. They may love it, they may hate it, they may resonate with it, they might become your fan or your follower, or they might become a hater. All of those things are going to happen, and they're things that you really have to be aware of, because the vulnerable part of the process, or the creative part of the process, the hundreds of hours that go into writing and producing a really good song or a really good piece of art, most people are going to judge it in 10 seconds or less. I'll work on a song, and this is how the record labels used to be. You'd send out a record that you get 15 seconds. You would spend hundreds and hundreds of hours, not to mention the practice and the cost of the equipment and all the time and energy you put into it and the thought into writing the lyrics and all those things, and you get 15 seconds. If it's visual art, somebody's going to walk by it, you might get 5 seconds. It might be on the street, people might not, you might get 2 seconds, and you as the artist are going to have far stronger feelings and far stronger reactions about all of those things than other people are going to have. So the hard part is, again, understanding that's just part of the process. Art is vulnerable, and you're going to experience things when you're releasing art, or when you're saying anything, when you're doing anything of consequence in the world, that's going to lead to backlash, or going to lead to negative responses, or going to lead to being hurt. And that's just part of life. So you're going to get hurt as part of this process, and it's just something you have to be ready for and be aware of. Well, I would say I literally have had help since the minute I was born. Music is all around us, art is all around us. For me, I started taking in that information from my very, very first steps. For my first years, my parents used to tell me I was obsessed with music and fascinated with music and wanted to listen to all kinds. And one of my first things that I owned as a child was a tape recorder. I grew up in the 80s, so some of you are like, what's a tape? But, I had a tape recorder and would record music and interact with music and had baby instruments and all those things around. So I believe I was inspired by music from the time I was born, and inspired by lots of different types of music. I grew up around classic rock and Motown and jazz and classical, a lot of professional musicians in my family. And then over the years, I moved into 80s music and electronic music and goth industrial music. And so for me, all of those things absolutely had a defining role in my process. Like the first one that I definitively point to, I brought up Depeche Mode earlier, but the album Violator by Depeche Mode, specifically the song Enjoy the Silence, was one of the keynote pieces to why I said, I want to write songs. I have something to say. I want to do something that's as beautiful as I think that this is. And so that's the first part of the help. And then from there, going into the process, I've had direct help from other musician friends. I sought out community. I played in bands. I was a drummer in a band with some of my friends over time. And all of those things helped me evolve. And then these days, I get so much help from other Twitch streamers and YouTubers. I've spent hundreds and hundreds of hours watching trainings and tutorials. The amount of content that's out there about anything that you want to do, no matter what your art or your medium is astounding. So I absolutely have had help, and art is communal. So for me, most art is derived from other art or your inspirations or things that you found. So I've had help both in inspiration and technical skills, in playing in bands and working with other musicians, and mentors in that space, people that helped me get better at the instrument or better at songwriting. So yes, you can't really do it alone. Everybody has inspiration from something, and most of us starting off are just copying something else, and that's fine. That's how great art is when you're starting, until you evolve your own voice and your own style. So yes, art is communal, and I've had tons of help. Absolutely agree with that. There are a lot of concepts that I explore in my art and that I explore in my work that are things that I would never talk about to anybody. Then again, as I've gotten older, I'll talk to anybody about anything if they ask me. But a lot of the concepts I'm exploring are deeply personal, sometimes sources of guilt and shame and regret, and things that I don't like in my life. I generally am not walking up to people and saying, hey, want to hear about the worst experience I've ever had in my life, or want to hear about violence I've experienced in my life, or relationships that have failed, or whatever. You don't normally walk up to somebody and talk about those things. So art provides a platform and a medium for me to be able to do things that I would never be able to do otherwise, and would never be able to communicate about otherwise. And I think that's the best type of art. It's both challenging to you as the artist, and it might also be challenging to a potential audience or to viewers or whatever. The idea is that a lot of times you're communicating things that just can't be expressed in a typical conversation, or and that can go the other direction. Lots of people make art about concepts like love and religion and spirituality and things like that, which are things that a lot of people just can't put into words for themselves. So I absolutely agree that the creative process gives me a platform to do and communicate in a way that I wouldn't communicate with other people, or that's rare in the human experience. So absolutely agree. Last and most important, I want to thank Torus Link for this opportunity. I'm a huge fan of the art that's going on over there, of the community that she and everyone else that are part of Torus Link is trying to build. I'm a huge supporter of what they do, and hopefully someday a huge supporter of what you do. I want to see what your creative process is. There's so many great mediums these days with YouTube and Instagram and Twitch, and so many different ways to get your process and your art out there. I'm excited to see what you create, and if there's nothing else that you take away from this video or watching what I do, it's don't give up on that process. Don't give up on it for yourself, and release it to the world. Show the world what you have to offer through your creative medium, through art, through music, through writing, through whatever it is that you do, because the world wants to see it, and I know for one, I do.